and capture.
No.
Good morning, everybody. It's good to have you all this morning. Have Mo back today. Uh, we can continue from our discussion from last week, which I think would be a great thing. And always enjoy having you, brother. It's just like, and I noticed that you made a comment about the food that I posted for our dinner. That's my wife's good cooking, so pretty good
It
stuff.
looks like I'm missing out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Need a little more of that. I could stand to miss a few of those. Well, anyways, good to have you, Mo, this morning, and let's. I'm just gonna just turn it over to you, brother. Take off.
That sounds great. Always enjoy coming in and having these discussions. Let me start off sharing my screen. All right, give me a thumbs up if you can, or tell me if you can see the whole screen behind you.
No, not quite.
Not quite?
Yeah. The very top of the header, I can't see on ours. It's got a black bar across.
There's a hole in the middle.
Yeah.
Thanks, Rob.
It's black, isn't it, Rob? I mean, what's the deal?
Lenny had a
there
background
it
for
is.
just a hot minute.
Got it.
Lenny had a background for just a quick minute, but I think he changed it, a black hole background. How about now? Is it showing up now?
Got
Okay.
it now.
All right. Eventually this morning, I want to talk about my first automobile. Chevy from 1990 is the first car I ever purchased and drove, and I love that thing.
Yay,
But
Chevy.
before we get there, Chevy, yes.
I said, yay, Chevy. My dad
Yay,
worked for
Chevy.
General Motors his whole life.
Yeah, my family wouldn't let me get anything other than a General Motors vehicle for most of my life. I wanted to frame it by talking about our family of origin. And this has really been meaningful to me as I've looked at both the positive and negative aspects of what I've inherited from my earthly family of origin. Not good, not bad, just this is how it works. We get shaped by the family of origin that we grew up in. They're our primary authority figures, whether they were present or not. Those shaping mechanisms were really important. And to frame it, I wanted to use a verse from the Gospels. Luke, we've seen this one before. If any of you come to me without hating your own father, mother, wife, children, brothers, sisters, and yes, even your own life, you can't be my disciple. That's Luke 14:26 in the Voice. Um, I looked up hate, and the word in the Semitic tradition in context, if you look at Jesus' overall context, he's using miseo to turn away from an attachment. It's a detachment from an identity, not literal hate. And so when you read this, Jesus, as he often does, he exaggerates his language to make a point. So there's two things here. Jesus is talking about our family of origin, and he's talking about the concept that we have of ourselves as a result. So if the word miseo is detachment from, to miseo your family of origin is to stop elevating or worshiping the social construct that defines who you're supposed to be, what you've inherited from your family, their expectations, their rules, their beliefs, their way of doing things. And in the same way, to miseo your psyche, your psyche or your ego, is to disidentify, to detach from the psychological persona that you've built, the I that wants to control, fix, preserve, and protect its own status. And we know this from our black hole exploration as spaghettification, my affectionate term for the dismantling of the story that we told ourselves, the things that happened, and the meaning that we've attached to it, how we've internalized those things that have happened over the course of our growing up. So, as I said, Jesus doesn't say things without a specific intention. He's very purposeful in the way he phrases things. He intends this as a shock to the system. He doesn't use it to recruit us into a hatred, an emotional hatred of our loved ones. You know, that's silly. He, in so many other places, tells us to love and honor our family. And he demonstrates it in his own life, especially with his mother. He uses it as a shock wave, a shock to the system. He's inviting us to consider what it means to radically detach from any human relationship or any ego construct that holds the primary gravity over our soul, that carries the most weight in the way that we show up in the world. So the way that I phrase it, to hate our earthly identity, hate in quotes here, simply means to let the weight of our attachments to that earthly identity dissolve in the overwhelming presence of our divine origin. So this is the ultimate spaghettification, to detach from any story that we've told ourselves, that we've inherited from our family, that we've inherited over the years, that we turned into our self-concept, our ego concept, detaching from any of those stories, letting those dissolve so that we can feel the weight and the overwhelming presence of our divine origin, and let that carry the weight in our life and relationships. So my first vehicle was a Chevy Lumina from 1990. Anybody remember the Lumina? It wasn't all that popular, but my friends called it the mini shark. It had a fin on the back, smooth as silk, you know, a 3.4 liter V6. It was a nice vehicle at the time, and I remember going to the lot and picking it up for the first time, first car, right? There's this joy in going to the lot and driving off with your first vehicle. It was right after I had just started working at GM as a crash safety engineer. And so, probably in true engineer fashion, I opened the owner's manual and I went straight to the schematics just to see all that was under the hood, all the features, all the things that I was going to get to play with. Now, you remember back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, there weren't nearly as many features as you have now. And that's changing so fast that, you know, in the next 5 years, they're going to be self-driving. And in many cases, that feature's already part of many vehicles. But I learned that right now, there are approximately 30 to 40 electronic control modules, computer modules in our vehicles. Now, if you have a higher end vehicle, that probably is more like 50 to 80. And if you have a vehicle with upper end autonomous driving, like you can have it self-drive on the highway, you're probably looking at upwards of 100 computer modules, all of them talking and communicating with each other as you're driving. So this is a little bit of a silly example, but hear me out. We're talking about spaghettification. When I got in that vehicle and I started driving it and got comfortable in it, I would never mistake that Chevy Lumina as me. I would never mistake that car as my identity of who I am. It was just something that belonged to me. I had an affection for it, liked driving it, liked tooling around with my friends in it. But it's easy to separate that car from being me. One step closer, when I got in the vehicle, these 30 to 50 computer modules that are all talking to each other in order for this vehicle to run. All the parts of the engine, transmission, all of the diagnostics that were running in the background, the operating system of that vehicle. All of that was necessary, but meaningless without me in the driver's seat. So in the same way, I didn't identify with the shell of the car, I also didn't identify with the operating system in the car. I didn't identify with the computer modules that were helping me drive this vehicle. All right, let's close our eyes for a quick second and just imagine this. This is going to be a little bit of a leap, but let's keep the backdrop of spaghettification in mind. I am traveling in this body, this vehicle. It is so close and so much a part of my day-to-day that I have a difficult time detaching from my body as my primary identity. And even more so, I have a hard time detaching from the operating system that I've inherited over all the years that I've been on the planet, mainly in my mind, as part of my identity. So, in the same way that it's obvious that I'm not my Chevy Lumina or the operating system that helps me drive it, it needs an operator, right? In the same way, the invitation I believe Jesus is putting on the table for us is there is a deeper way for us to identify than the body and the mind that we are traveling in this life. And it's the operator, it's the one through which we're looking through the mind and through the body at the world we inhabit. I hope that makes sense. And if you have questions, I'd be glad to talk it through because this is a little bit of a difficult concept to get a hold of, that the body and the mind that we so tightly identify with is not the bigger story of our lives. So we've talked about the eye of the hurricane. I am not the inherited story that the swirl, the storm of the hurricane contains. I am the still presence at the center of that hurricane that is witnessing, that is aware of and present to everything that's happening, looking through, being present to, but not identified with. So I'm not my inherited story. I'm not my family of origin story. And I'm not my self story, the one that I've told myself since birth. My identity is deeper. My identity is eternal. And it was put in place well before I ever showed up on the planet. The invitation is to excavate that identity, to excavate that image that God has had of us so it can override, carry more weight than our inherited story as we live out our lives. Well, what has to happen in order for that excavation? Spaghettification, right? We have to detach from those very, very persuasive ways of being and patterns that we've picked up along the way. So I'm going to put this on the table for us as a discussion point, and it doesn't have to be limited to this. Any questions or feedback or examples that you might have from your own life, or JL, questions from last time. That's open. But one starter question: what is one way you've detached from your family of origin story or to the story of your own self? What's one single way that you've specifically, intentionally detached from something in your family story, your earthly story, that you internalized? You intentionally separated from that in order to live out a different way. Let me stop my share. All right. Let me just ask us, if I could, I'll just do 30 seconds. If you wouldn't mind, just take 30 seconds with me to close your eyes, just take a few deep breaths, and see what comes up. See what the spirit brings up as you noodle this idea of detachment from your earthly origin story in order to connect with a heavenly origin story. 30 seconds starts now. Three, two, and one. And we're back. All right, who's got some feedback or a question or a thought about this idea of spaghettifying your earthly temporary story and connecting with a deeper one? Rob, go ahead.
Since you asked, I just wanted to interject this because it did occur to me fairly quickly about things we've done to detach from the sort of inherited memes or whatever you would call them. Um, Sometimes I believe it, or I have experienced, it can be things that you don't consciously do, but life just brings to your doorstep. And they occur in our lives, but not as a willful exercise that can change our perspective for good, bad, or ugly, or for some purpose that we have trouble gleaning. We might initially see it as a bad thing. It turns out for the better, or vice versa. So that's just an observation.
I appreciate that, Rob. One thing I didn't mention is that most of the story that we inherit from our earthly family of origin gets into our subconscious programming. So we're not aware of it. We're just living. We're just living our lives. And we just inherit these patterns of thinking, that programming, and that's what we, so you're absolutely right that some of these things make their way to the surface just as a result of living out our lives. I'll give you just one example, and I'm sure many have others. Probably because my parents came from India with, very little in their pocket. We were just ultra careful, very frugal with everything growing up. And that turned into a scarcity mindset for me. And the lack of wisdom in helping people who I would encounter on the street because the framing of what they would do with it, they would be careless with it. So you can't give money to those who need it. They're just going to spend it on alcohol and drugs. When I would feel in my heart, I wanted to help. I didn't realize I had picked that up. That was decades before I questioned that and said, what business is it of mine, what they use it for? If there's something nudging me to be generous with what God has given me, I need to respond to that. And so, later when I was going through my own financial difficulties, I would make a point when those nudges came up, I would give anonymously oftentimes, but God would nudge, I would give, and I would believe that in the abundance of the universe, God would provide. But that was something that came up, like Rob said, as a result of just living life. That recognition came up as that I inherited that. That came from somewhere, that scarcity mindset. I still sometimes feel that idea that I only have a little piece of the pie to distribute. And God says, that's not your heavenly origin story, young man. That's not where you're getting at. Who else? What else have you picked up along the way? Or what questions might you have?
I think probably my story is more like I was raised on the farm, and we were I mean, like you, my folks were extremely frugal, and they pretty much gave off the vibe that we were in that poor class and you couldn't get out of that because we were born into that type thing. And so for a long time I lived that like that, thinking, well, it doesn't matter. I work, you work hard, you're never going to get out of being poor, you know what I mean? And then God revealed to me that he gave us the ability to have abundance, and it changed my way of thinking somewhat, and then of course it's still changing, still everything, because takes a long time to get over that kind of stuff. And so yeah, so that was probably the biggest thing for me, I think.
I've told the story a lot of times about how I was uh, in my 20th year. I started channeling my father, and my father was a womanizing drunk. And I wasn't happy doing it, but I thought it was who I needed to be. I was angry about things, and then Flo came along, and in retrospect, I don't remember a moment when I sat down and consciously made this decision, but in retrospect, I realized I couldn't be that big a jerk and have her on my arm. And she never sat me down and waved her finger in my face or said, you got to straighten up or anything. I just realized over a period of time. I wrote a blog about it some time back called Saved by Love. And I was Mach 3 with my hair on fire on a dead end road when Flo came along. And I quoted the great Eagles tune line, I found out a long time ago what a woman can do to your soul. She can't take you anywhere you don't already know how to go. I always thought that was a downer until I thought of it in this perspective. But what that said is Flo brought she let me find who I really was. She's still doing that. It's been a process over 60 years. She still brings my better angels out in me. But that all goes back to that. I had a convertible. She'd come out, I'd go to pick her up, and she'd come out with a scarf on or whatever because she had long hair. I'd always put the top up. She finally, several years later, said, "Why did you do that? Why did you put the top up?" And I said, "I didn't want anybody to see you in the car with me because of other women I'd had in the car with me. I didn't want them to associate them with you with them." She was different. And this isn't about edifying Flo. It's about saying that when something really worthwhile comes along, it can not only alter your life. In my case, I'm convinced she fundamentally saved my life. She certainly saved it as I know it, because where I am now is I was not headed there at all. I'll finish it by saying that I'm alive, not in jail, and married to a good woman because of the prayers of my mother. I think Flo was exactly that. She was something I needed desperately, and still do, by the way.
I remember reading that verse in Luke and thinking, we've seen that much like we do with the scriptures. We've seen it 50 times. We've lost the shock value. We've lost the shock value of what they must have felt when he told them that you have to hate. In comparison, you have to hate members of your own family, those that are closest to you, in order to live with your family from a different place. It's just such a shocking thing. I still to this day question some of the ways that I show up. Am I doing it for the purpose of pleasing or carrying on or showing up a certain way rather than aligning with the way of Jesus? Gracie, go ahead. And then Rob. Oh, Gracie, I think come off mute. There you go.
Okay, sorry. Um, I was raised parents with parents that loved God. People would call them heretics now because they didn't believe in hell or the rapture. But anyway, I still in high school felt like I had to have some identity. And from high school and my first 10 years of marriage, my identity was alcohol and partying. And then when I had kids, it changed. My identity was my children. And then later on, when my oldest, who was just all love, pretty much estranged me, it really broke me because I realized she was my identity. And it wasn't until God opened my eyes that I finally saw, uh, I call it a divine encounter. I finally saw that my my tears changed from my daughter being lost to his redeeming love is so great that that is all that really matters. And now I have a brother who's was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer over a year ago. And my family is like, aren't you worried like we are? And it's not that not that I don't care about it, but I prayed about it first and I still pray about it. But God has given me a peace about it that you can only get when you realize that this isn't uh, this isn't our identity, and that cancer is not his identity, and I won't accept it as his identity. Um, I don't know.
That's beautiful, Gracie. I've felt that with my kids for sure. And that's why it's so important in context that this is not an emotional detachment from those that you love. It is a detachment to the identity that they bring to you so that you can be fully present for them from a place of unconditional love. You're not conditioned by what they bring to you in terms of identity. You get your identity here, and that's what you bring in. And you just spoke that so beautifully for your daughter. Um, that's a hard thing because we love them so much. Yeah. Rob, go ahead, and then Bob again.
There's just another parenthetical kind of observation. It may be too obvious to even mention, but if it's not too obvious, it could be equally important that hating, or I prefer to think of it as forswearing your family, your mother and your father and your brothers and your sister. By extension, we're talking about our genetic environment that we're sort of that is imposed upon us. Um, I would think it would apply to the tribe as well, which is also your genetic lineage. And that begs the question of the tradition, or tradition in general, which it wasn't totally infrequent that Jesus would mention tradition, but I once did an old-fashioned search without AI, like through a Bible concordance and stuff, to try to find out how many times Jesus did mention tradition in the various Gospels. And it's not infrequent, but it was almost always in the context of being critical of it. So this is broadly speaking of detachment that goes beyond the immediate pretext of personal family. It's almost allegorical, I think.
Any attachment from which you are drawing meaning, purpose, and identity.
And
So
that
tradition
would
is definitely an important part of that.
that could
Absolutely.
be extension apply to bodily life and the
Yes.
body, or your vehicle.
The body and the mind being the vehicle and the operating system in which you are traveling, in which you are showing up in the world. Yeah. It reminds me, Rob, Jesus had to do the same thing. He had to detach from his earthly family of origin story and the tradition that dictated the expectations they had of him to just line up in order to fulfill being about his father's business, his heavenly father's business, right? So he had to make the same shift, paradigm shift in his own life. So he's not asking us in vain, he's demonstrating it and then inviting us to do the same. Did he ever lose that love, especially for mom? We see that later in the story. No, it elevated it, absolutely elevated it until the let's see, I think Bob had his hand up and then Sharon.
Go ahead, Sharon. I want to hear what you got to say.
Okay. It's a little different and it's weird, and I wasn't sure if I could share this properly, but I'll try. Um, my origin story, my growing up was kind of, I don't even know how to put this into words properly. It was sort of a schizophrenic understanding of where I came from. My father was a farm boy, a Golden Gloves champ in college, who pulled himself up by his bootstraps and came from a very religious, uh, multi types of Baptist family. My mother was not allowed to lift a finger and grew up in first generation English semi aristocracy in Philadelphia, and everybody taking care of her. And she hated it. She wanted to be able to go sweep off the stoop like her friends. And she was never allowed to even think about such a thing. So I had those two cultural things coming in, and plus they did love the Lord, but from a completely different, much more formal perspective. And how they ended up together is I still don't understand the story. I still don't understand how they got together. But they had an interesting and wonderful marriage. They were married almost 50 years. But as a child, I heard all the time, we don't do that. No matter what it was. If it was a little bit what my mother would consider crass or below us, we don't do that. That's not what we do. If I wanted to do something like take horseback riding lessons or something, my father says we don't do that. That's out of our realm. So I had these two things warring in my head all the time. And at the same time, from a very early age, the Lord had made himself so real to me. And I felt his presence all the time and I loved him. I was raised to know practically from my crib that the Lord loved me and he was a part of my life forever. And my mother did a beautiful, beautiful gift in conveying that to me. So I had these things fighting with me all the time. I said, why could there be so many differences in people? And why are some of my friends okay and some of my friends aren't okay? And they can do that and I can do this. And it's a wonder I didn't go wacky sometimes. And maybe I did once in a while. But what finally happened for me was when the Lord, I acknowledged that I heard the Lord in my heart, that I heard his voice, and that I had a purpose, and that all people were precious to him. And it didn't have anything to do with whether they were raised to know how to use 17 different pieces of silverware when you sat down at a meal, or you got up at 5 o'clock every morning and fed 17 people to go out and work in the field, like my grandmother did. Um, everybody was valuable and precious. And I started to live that way, and it caused a lot of trouble. That was my spaghettification, I guess, Mo. And I would get pushback from both sides all the time until finally there came a time when I think most of my family, there's still to this day some who probably don't, but accepted me as choosing to be outside of the identities that were they tried to put upon me, that I had to choose one or the other or walk this weird line and be neither one and have nothing of either side, instead of realizing that all of it was available to me and everyone else because it was God who provided all these things and that gave the identity of value. So I sometimes get frustrated when I think back because I know how hard that was for me when I was little. I put it out of my mind most of the time, except when people like you bring it up, Mo, and make me think. But that's a good thing. And you realize that God had a plan and he walked you through it. And hopefully you've been able to understand people on both sides of the coin and struggling with the same things. And to me, that's what it's all about. Everything that I've ever gone through, I believe, has a purpose, whether God was thrilled that I did it or I didn't, that he would always make it work together for good, that it would help someone else, that I would be able to understand or speak into their life or whatever. And so if that's what you're looking for, that's kind of what I sensed when you were saying that was the only spaghettification I can think of, is I had to pull out of these warring mindsets about preconceived, this is what you are because this is what you were born, you know? And that's not it, because
Yeah,
we were real born what he made us born.
that's so good, Sharon. So good. I mean, I'm so glad that you took the risk of sharing it, even though you weren't sure how it was going to come out. That's excellent. It reminds me of that hurricane.
Mm,
All of these competing identities and expectations of what you're supposed to be like and how to act and behave, right? All of these are trying to pull you into its storm. These are
yes.
all storms swirling around. But even back then, there was a part of you that was experiencing the stillness in the center of that,
And yeah,
that God continues to invite us back into, to connect, let the gravity come back to that still place, that still point in the center where you recognize the storms, but you detach your identity from all of those things swirling around you. So I think you're right. That was a great example of spaghettification.
Jack wanted to
And
say
no, you
something.
just didn't, and you left out in the middle of all that. You had an aunt that was a missionary in Japan,
Oh, in China. Oh,
in
yeah.
China.
And on my father's side of the family, I had an aunt who was a missionary who thought they were all wrong, and everybody else was wrong. But she was a major influence on my life in her
Mm,
trust of the Lord. She went to
mm,
China when all the churches said she couldn't go, and she just picked up and went. A young widow
mm.
said, "God's calling me to China, and I'm going to go and I'm going to preach, even if I'm not supposed to open my mouth." And she started a myriad of churches, and there are churches all over the Northeast here. The Chinese people came after the Second World War was over, and they opened churches. You would not have believed what her funeral was like, and the pastors, the young Chinese pastors who were now
Mm.
in this country had come. And I learned from her that she went against everything in her family. You know, she had the warring Baptist factions on my father's side of the family, and she was, like I said, she was widowed young without children, and she just heard from God and listened. She was able to detach herself from that, and yet never was cruel or mean or hateful to anyone in the family. Though, let me tell you, holiday dinners were always fun in our family. There were lots of
I-
conversations, but nobody was afraid to talk and express
uh,
their opinion. And you'd hear the every which ways version on any verse you ever want to throw at. But I still think it was good. We all have to do that if we're going to succeed. And I believe God programs us deeply inside to succeed at what He's called us here for. We have to find a way to do that. And maybe I'm so thankful for what you brought out about this being a detachment, not a hatred. That verse has bothered
mhm.
me for decades. And I would love that slide, by the way. I would that where you explain that and what that word means, if I can pick that up from somewhere. But I have some people I'd love to explain that to. So this is great. Thank you. And I'm glad that if
Of course.
anything I said anything was helpful.
Yeah, it certainly was helpful. Thank you. Um, Maybe just as a reinforcement, Sharon, the idea of detachment isn't a thumbing your nose at or giving the middle finger to
Right.
of, it is detachment from the meaning and purpose and expectations that you've inherited so that you can be fully present in love with them, right? It's not for what you can get from them. It's what you now have access to give to them in spite of whatever disagreements, however they see you. Yeah.
Thank you. That clarify. I wanted to make sure I made that clear that you're giving up. You can't allow what your family, especially in our case, and my husband, I know my husband too has had this too, your family to tell you who you are. Because God just has really told us who we are, and it'll reveal itself as it goes forward. So if we're
You got
detaching
it.
ourselves from anything, um it's kind of like the paper doll clothes that they put over us, that this is what you are, this is what you come from, so you're stuck here. Like yeah, I thank you. I'm glad you clarified that.
Any voice that tells you who you are, including your own, that carries more weight than what God has eternally said, needs to be detached. That's basically it in a sentence.
Yep. Amen.
And that would extend to your religion too, by extension, right? By implication.
Absolutely.
Not
Yes.
just your family or your immediate culture, but things
Any
that
voice.
things
Any
that you're
voice.
told by authorities in the name of God.
Yeah.
Yes.
So you were
Yeah. Thank you,
talking,
Rob.
take it down.
Bob and then Stan.
A very practical application of this, and I had not ever thought of the term spaghettification in this context, but in my consulting practice, which I did a bunch of years, and very, very regularly, a client would say, "Why don't you come to work for us?" I think of the greatest company I ever consulted for, and I really consulted with some great ones. A company called Modern Woodmen of America. When I started the project, they were 125 years old, and they were a life insurance society, started, by the way, inspired by something a pastor said in a sermon. 125 years earlier. And we were re-engineering all of their processes. And I went in with a group of consultants, and fairly early on, all of a sudden, a whole bunch of us are sitting at a table and all their managers are out in front of us. An unfortunate way to set things up. But the question came up, what does Modern Woodmen expect? What kind of return on investment do you expect from this consulting project? It was quiet for a minute. And finally, one guy, a young manager, said, well, if our people out in the field are happy. And I thought, well, I belong here. And after the first engagement, that was a 6-month engagement, and Woodman came back to the guy that had the project and said, we want everybody to leave but Bob. And we had a war room. We'd get together, and I had this group, the brilliant setup. Half of them were experienced people, and half of them were people who had been with the company no more than 2 years, because the executive sponsor wanted the young people to figure out why we were where we were 25 years from now. It was a brilliant company. But they came to me and said, we'd really like for you to join our company. It was a tremendous compliment from these people. But I said, and I'd said it before, but it was a much deeper thing with this company, because I loved them so much. I said, I can't tell you how much I'm complimented by that and how much I appreciate that offer. But if I become one of your employees, I won't be who you see me as now. Now I'm a person who sees everything from an arm's length. Matter of fact, at one point I had said I was going there 8 days a month, and they were paying me a lot of money a day. And they had a month where they had me up there 10 days, and I said, I'm here too much. And the executive sponsor said, well, aren't we paying you? No, I said, you're paying me great. But if I'm here too much, I lose my objective point of view. I think maybe a thing, I'll submit this to you, Mo, that you're saying to us is this person we're looking for, this person who existed before the foundations of the earth. The perfect place for us to be is for us to look at all the influences and forces and positives and negatives and everything around us, but always be able to stand back and look at it and look at ourselves objectively. And I could always think very openly about a company. I could say or do whatever I needed to say. I could often say, I hope I'm wrong here, but I'm going to say this, for example. And there's a power in that. During COVID, the second level guy in that whole company called me one day and said, I got to tell you that if you hadn't done what you did for us 20 years ago, we would have had to close the company during COVID because we couldn't come to the office. So the impact that we could have both on ourselves and on all those around us when we become truly objective, when we just reach down within ourselves and just say, I'm going to give everything I've got to this with no strings attached. I don't need to worry about what HR says, or will I offend my boss, or any of these influences. I could just be who I am. There's an enormous amount of power in that in our lives.
I think that's excellent, Bob. I'd like to come back to that in a second, but Stan, go ahead.
Yeah, I was born in the mid-50s during a time when the perception was that as Black people, we were inferior to white people. And I recall specifically an incident when, the schools were integrated, and there was this one white teacher who called on me, and she spelled out some letters and asked me to pronounce the word. And the thing was, where I grew up, we spoke with a dialect, very similar to a Caribbean dialect. And so I pronounced the word, and she just had a smile on her face. and just went on to illustrate whatever her point was, which I don't recall. But I just remembered the sting of that. There was a sense of shame. Um, I recall also that there were times when, questions were posed by the instructors in class, and I thought I knew the answer, but I was very reluctant to raise my hand and to respond. And it wasn't until 2001, I'm an adult, married, I have a family, and I was taking this leadership course. And one of the instructors would have like one-on-one sessions with you. And he expressed to me that he thought that I was very intelligent, but that I was holding back. And I'm thinking to myself, how would he even know this? But then he, went on and just shared some things, and I just had to come to the realization that that he was right. And it wasn't until that time, 2001, that I, kind of dealt with that traumatic experience that I had from growing up. And, it kind of pushed me to really express myself more. And I saw that there were times when I was faced with an issue or a problem that I really didn't know the answer to, but then somehow it's like an answer would just rise up from within me, and it would be correct. And, and I would share that, or use that to solve the problem. But that's, I guess, one way of detaching from that, I guess, sort of identity that I want to say, inherited. Um, but now, fast forward, even the times when I visited my home, and there are people who haven't left home. I've lost the dialects from having traveled so much. But when I have encounter and relationships with friends who still live there and still have the dialect, I just have an appreciation for them like, I did not have before.
And what you shared about your teacher getting you to pronounce it, maybe for the purpose of highlighting how much lesser than you were. I'm not sure if that's exactly how she was framing it, but it reminded me of James Baldwin's quote that I've used often. He says, "It took many years of vomiting up all the filth I'd been taught about myself and half believed before I was able to walk on the earth as though I had a right to be here."
Mm.
He's speaking your experience.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. Go ahead, Jack.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank Bob for um, just about bringing me to tears, and um, in a story that I'll relate that Sharon got to meet. I get through this. Give me a sec. My grandmother was in hospice, and it was my grandparents that had taken me to church when we finally got to move back to Rhode Island because, being a Navy brat, we're all over the place. My mom was brought up and went to Catholic school, but I never heard about God until I was like 6 years old, living in Maryland when a little girl had probably gone to Bible, what's that? The vacation Bible school, and told me that Jesus made me, that God made me. And I was like, I didn't know that. But anyway, back in, it was 28 years now. No,
No, that would be 1997.
97.
So almost 30 years, 29 years.
Sharon and I were friends. We went to church, and I said that I was going to visit my grandmother in hospice. She was And Grandma prayed me through all my, what do you do with the drunken sailor days? And it was much later. And when you walked into her room, you could sense God's presence. There was an air about the place. Sharon walked into the room and my grandmother lit up
Yeah, she couldn't
because
she saw it
she
clear.
was just so happy to see her with me. If it was her spirit or it's just the air in the place was different.
But speak. She couldn't speak, but she looked me right in the eye. And I had already started to sense that there's something more going on here than I understood. And I got the feeling like she was just glad I was there and somehow welcoming me. And I thought that was so strange because she had no idea who I was. But it was a beautiful thing and something I've held on to. And I'm glad it touched my honey so much that way because it was something from his youth of I can't put it into words for him, but it was nice. It was a gift. It was a gift. And not sure how to apply that to the detachment part, but I know you had a sense of what you wanted to say.
No, it was part of like I mentioned, that a lot of people didn't know what to do with me after I left behind the alcohol and drugs and came into Christ and lived a different way. That they could only it's like they couldn't see the the different me. When you come out of that lifestyle and
Jack, I wonder if your grandmother was touching on something that she saw that carried more weight than the old story that had defined you for so long. And that's what was touching. Just the
yep,
look, without having to say anything, she was touching on that deeper part of you, the story that God had known that carried more weight than maybe even the story you had told yourself.
no, for sure.
Well, that makes sense. Makes sense. Yeah.
I wanted to go back to something. Thank you so much for that, Jack. It, there's there's something beautiful when people are able to call that out in us, and we can do that for each other. I want to go back to something Bob said about the bigger picture, like stepping back. Um, in the same way I talked about riding in my first Chevy and this vehicle and this operating system that I was traveling in needed someone driving it, right? The vehicle and the operating system on its own did no good if it was just sitting there. It looked nice, maybe. But in the same way, this is a hard leap to make. We are not the person defined by the body and the mind. We are the spirit joined with God, living through, traveling in this body and the mind. And so the weight is on the eternal part of us, living through this temporary part of us that we call a human body and a human mind. It's hard, it is so hard to describe. It's easy to see in a car that I don't identify as the car or the computer modules that are talking to each other. It's much harder in this vessel not to identify with those parts of us from our earthly story. But yet the invitation is there is a part of you that always has the big picture that Bob referred to. It always speaks from a place of detachment from earthly identity because it's identified with Christ. I'm crucified with Christ, nevertheless I live. Yet, not I, but Christ. There's a deeper part of us that's living out through this temporary vessel. And the invitation is let that have all of the weight. Call that out in yourself and in each other. Bob, go ahead.
That really raises the bar in your life. For me to be giving counsel to a company with $10 billion in assets and 400 amazing employees that have been around for 125 years, that really made me get out of bed in the morning. That really made me reach down within myself. And I came away from that project. I built 360 days in that project over 3 years. I came away from that project a far better human, not just a better consultant, but a better human being than when I walked in the door. Because when I looked around and saw how unique and marvelous each one of these people were, and none of them were perfect. Each one of them had, and their processes. When I looked at their processes, and I saw, wow, this doesn't work right, and that doesn't. But I looked at it from a perspective, from an objective perspective, as my purpose here is to make this work better. The project manager in that project was a middle-level IT guy. He was in his early 40s, middle-level IT guy, wasn't a supervisor of anything. I got about 2 years into the project, and I walked into the executive sponsor's office one day. And I said, I know this isn't my written purview of what I'm doing here, but it's part of my job here to bring out the absolute best I can in Pat Saunders, my project manager. That executive sponsor said, Jerry O'Dean, he said, bingo, do that. Before he retired, this middle-level IT guy, through what we did in that project, became the number 2 man at Modern Woodmen of America. He retired as the number 2 guy. Now, he was that quality guy. But when you can find yourself looking around you, and the world's a marvelous place, by the way, we talk about the storms, the trials, and all that, but we're looking at the creation of God. We're looking at man made in his own image and likeness. We're looking at his creation. We're looking at what he said at the end of book 1, chapter 1. This is very good. When we can objectively look at that and think, wow, God's put me here, and I can give advice to this company whose real concern is how's it really going for our customers and our guys in the field. Wasn't about the dollar. We wanted X percent over a 90-day period and X percent over 2 years. It was about quality of life, and that raised a bar in me. That project's been over for 25 years, and I'm still influenced by it. But if we can look at life around us, if we can look at what we think is the storm, and really see it as the awesome energy of the creation, expressing itself wildly and unconstrained, and say we can speak into that and make it more powerful, it brings things out in us that are beyond our comprehension. That makes sense, bro.
It does. Yeah, I think maybe to frame it with the verse we started off with, when you detach your identity and meaning from the things around you and instead attach it to your eternal story, your heavenly origin story, identifying with the spirit, you become fully human. The best version of your human experience flows from that. That's what you're describing.
And then that best in you, that image and likeness of God, which makes you a creative, by the way, and makes you pretty awesome, looks at all around you. I've never seen the storm as energy before in this conversation. I've never seen all this outpouring of incredible energy. We all see it as, oh my gosh, we're buffeted here and we're buffeted. No, we're participating in the energy of creation. And if we can look at it and say, wow, I'm here, and this is incredible. What did you put in me? Because I'm convinced you did. You put something in me to allow me to make all of this better. I came that you might have life and that more abundantly. I believe was Jesus' mission statement, and I believe it's ours. And all of a sudden, something that down in you comes out. And what you've been talking to us about for a long time is our true purpose. And all of a sudden, the needs of the world and the needs of our soul join. And we talked about the difference between magic and miracle last week. It's a miracle. Miracles happen.
Absolutely. I feel like we've just really scratched the surface again, Mo. So all this discussion has been fantastic. I guess my point in saying that is, when can you do this again?
Let's touch base, JL. We'll get
All right.
another date on the calendar.
Sounds
Listen,
good.
we don't need you to do it before noon your time next Sunday, Mo. Just, you know.
All right. Father, thank you so much for this time that we can come together and just share each other's hearts and to share your heart through us and to share the love that we have from you through us, those around us. Lord, I thank you so much for this group, and I feel extremely blessed to be able to be a part of this. And for Brother Mo, and I thank you for his insights. And just feel like I'm the piece of iron getting sharpened and sharpened and sharpened, and I love it. So, Father, we love you. We praise your holy name, and we thank you for who you are in us. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. Well, we will get together, and Mo and I will get together, and we'll figure out when we can do this again. Other than that, we'll plan on being here next week, regardless whether Mo or me or somebody. Somebody will do it.
Hey Mo, would you send me that
Yes.
slide that Sharon talked about so I can send it out to everybody?
Sure, I sure will.
Thanks.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Well, love you all.
Have a great
Shalom,
week.
shalom. God bless everyone.
Shalom.